The battlefield was a graveyard of steel and flesh. The twin suns of Draxus burned dim through the smoke-choked sky, their light barely piercing the dust and blood that hung heavy in the air. The echoes of war drums had faded, drowned by the screams of the dying and the victorious alike. Queen Scara lay among the fallen, her breath ragged, her body broken in ways she had never imagined possible. For years, she had been the nightmare of the stars, the warrior queen whose name sent empires into quiet dread. She had led her armies across 100 worlds, conquered without mercy, ruled without question. And yet here she was, sprawled upon the blood-soaked ground, her armor shattered, her leg twisted unnaturally beneath her. The betrayal had come swiftly. She had seen it in the moment before the spear found her side, before her most trusted general, Varrock the Valiant, plunged it through her defenses and into her flesh. The weight of treachery hurt more than the wound itself. Her forces had collapsed soon after, her warriors confused and leaderless as Varrock seized control. Those who had once sworn oaths of eternal loyalty scattered like dust in the wind. The realization that it was over settled upon her, like the crushing weight of a collapsed star. She was no longer a queen, no longer a warrior. Just a fallen relic in a war she thought she would never lose. The sound of approaching footsteps cut through the haze of pain clouding her mind. She gritted her teeth, readying herself for the final blow. She would not beg. She would not crawl. If this was her end, she would meet it with her head high. But the figure that knelt beside her did not carry a sword. He was a man, human, clothed in the dull rags of servitude. A slave. Her breath hitched as recognition flared in her mind. She had seen this one before, among the ranks of the menial workers in her palace. He was nothing. A faceless laborer toiling in silence while the galaxy bent to her will. Yet here he was, staring down at her with something unexpected in his gaze. Not hatred, not vengeance. Something else entirely. Before she could find the words to cast him away, his hands were on her, pressing against the wound at her side, and the darkness at the edges of her vision swallowed her whole. Elian's hands were slick with blood. It wasn't the first time he had seen a body broken by war, nor was it the first time he had been forced to care for someone who might have once ordered his execution. But this, her, was different. Queen Scara. The name was spoken in hushed reverence and fear across the galaxy. She had crushed rebellions, enslaved entire worlds, and ruled with an iron will that never wavered. And now she was lying here, helpless and broken beneath his touch. A strange thing, fate. He should have left her. Let the mercenaries pick through the bodies and finish what betrayal had started. Perhaps the universe would have been better for it. But he was not like her. He had spent years under the rule of her empire, witnessing firsthand the cruelty of her conquests. Yet he had also seen the weight she carried, the burden of power, the exhaustion she never showed but could not fully hide. She was a tyrant, yes, but she was still alive. And something in him refused to let her die like this. His fingers worked quickly, tearing strips from his own tunic to wrap around the deep gash at her side. The wound was bad, but not fatal. Not if he moved quickly. Her leg was worse, twisted at an unnatural angle, the bones likely shattered from the fall. The sound of distant voices sent his heart hammering. The scavengers would be here soon, picking through the remnants of battle, taking anything of value, including wounded enemies. Elian had seen what happened to captured queens. Scara might have been a terror on the battlefield, but to those who despised her, she would be nothing more than a trophy to be paraded, humiliated, and discarded when they had taken their fill. The thought twisted something deep in his gut. He had a choice now. Leave her to fate, or carry the weight of a fallen queen upon his back. The decision came before his mind had caught up with it. Grunting, he shifted her body, careful to avoid worsening her injuries, and lifted her into his arms. She was heavier than she looked, despite her regal frame. Her body, sculpted by years of war, was dead weight against him. Elian staggered beneath her weight, his muscles screaming in protest. But he pushed forward. The battlefield stretched endlessly ahead, the cold wind biting at his skin as he trudged toward the shadows of the ruined outpost in the distance. It wasn't much, just an abandoned bunker from wars long past. But it would be shelter. It would have to be. As he carried her, he caught the faintest sound, a breath, barely a whisper. Her eyes fluttered open, unfocused but burning with the remnants of defiance. "Why?" she rasped, voice raw with pain. Elian didn't answer, because he didn't know. All he knew was that he was walking into a storm far greater than the battlefield he had left behind, and there was no turning back. Elian collapsed onto the cold stone floor of the bunker, his arms trembling from the effort of carrying her across the battlefield. His breath came in ragged gulps, his body burning with exhaustion. But he didn't stop. He couldn't. Queen Scara lay motionless on the makeshift cot he had fashioned from scavenged supplies. Her body, stripped of its once imposing armor, looked smaller. Not weak, never weak, but different. Without the gleaming black plates that had made her seem invincible, she was just flesh and blood. Her breathing was shallow, her face pale beneath the bruises forming along her jaw. He had seen warriors brought low before, but never her. She was supposed to be untouchable. And yet, here she was, crippled and helpless, dependent on a man she had never once acknowledged as anything more than property. Elian shook the thought away, moving to check her wounds. The bandages he had tied in haste were already soaked through with blood. He worked quickly, tearing what little fabric he had left to replace them. As he reached for her leg, she stirred. The motion was slight, just a twitch of her fingers at first, then a sharp inhale as the pain dragged her back to consciousness. Her eyes fluttered open, unfocused, confused. Then they locked onto him, and the fire returned. "You." The word came out rough, laced with venom even through her evident weakness. Elian met her gaze without flinching. "Yes. Me." Her nostrils flared, the sharp, biting fury in her expression only somewhat dimmed by the pain tightening her features. "You dare." She tried to sit up, but her body betrayed her, collapsing back against the cot with a strangled hiss. Elian sighed. "If you keep thrashing around, you're going to make it worse." She bared her teeth. "I'd rather die than owe my life to you." Elian tilted his head, considering that. "You were dying," he said simply. "I could have left you out there." She swallowed hard, her breathing uneven, but her eyes never left his. "Then why didn't you?" The question hung between them, heavy and unspoken for too long. Elian didn't have an easy answer, so he said the only thing that felt true. "Because I'm not like you." For a moment she said nothing. Then she laughed. It was a dry, brittle sound, more bitterness than humor, but it sent a strange shiver through him all the same. "Oh," she said, her voice lower now, almost amused despite the rasp of pain behind it. "Is that what you think?" Elian frowned. "I know it." Her gaze burned into him, searching for weakness, for anything she could twist into a weapon against him. But he wasn't afraid of her. Not anymore. "I don't need your pity," she said coldly. "Good," he shot back. "Because I didn't save you out of pity." A muscle in her jaw tightened. For the first time she looked uncertain. Not defeated, not broken, but something else, something unfamiliar. Elian exhaled, shaking his head. "You can hate me all you want, Scara, but I saved you. And whether you like it or not, you need me right now." Her fingers clenched into the fabric of the cot beneath her, her breathing ragged. For once, she had no retort. And that, more than anything, unsettled her the most. The hours passed in tense silence. Elian worked without speaking, tending to her wounds with practiced efficiency. He had spent years treating injuries far worse than hers, though none had ever belonged to a woman who had once commanded the slaughter of his kind. Scara lay still, watching him like a caged beast sizing up its captor. He felt her gaze on him with every movement, but he refused to acknowledge it. If she wanted to kill him, she would have to get up first. And given the state of her leg, that wasn't happening anytime soon. Finally, she broke the silence. "Do you truly believe this means anything?" Elian kept his focus on his work, cleaning the jagged wound along her ribs. "What are you talking about?" She narrowed her eyes. "This? You? Playing the merciful savior? Do you think that changes what you are?" He paused, glancing up at her. "And what's that?" Her lips curled in something that wasn't quite a smile. "A slave." Elian let the words sit between them for a moment. Then he leaned back, resting his forearms on his knees. "You're not in a position to talk about chains right now, Your Majesty." Scara's nostrils flared. "You dare mock me?" He exhaled through his nose. "I dare tell the truth." She scoffed, but there was something else in her expression now, something thoughtful, almost wary. Elian studied her, tilting his head slightly. "You always saw me as less than you. But tell me, Queen Scara." He gestured to the state of her, broken and bleeding on a cot she couldn't even get up from. Who holds the power here now? Her jaw clenched. For a long moment, she said nothing. Then, in a voice quieter than before, she asked, "What do you intend to do with me?" The question was raw, vulnerable. And Elian had the sudden, sobering realization that she had never had to ask such a thing before. The mighty warrior queen, feared across the stars, had never known what it meant to be at the mercy of another. He let out a slow breath, rubbing a hand over his face. "Right now? Keep you alive." She studied him carefully. "And after that?" Elian met her gaze. He didn't have an answer. But the longer he looked at her, the more he realized something dangerous. He wanted to find one. And for the first time, Scara didn't look at him with disgust. For the first time, she looked at him as something else entirely. Something uncertain. Something unsettling. And maybe, just maybe, something she didn't understand either. The fire crackled low, its dim light casting flickering shadows against the cold walls of the bunker. The outside world remained eerily silent, save for the distant howling of the wind across the battlefield ruins. The once mighty Queen Scara lay motionless on the cot, her breath steady but shallow, her body betraying her will to rise. Elian sat across from her, tending to the last of her wounds. The gash along her ribs had stopped bleeding, though it would scar. Her leg, however, was another story. The fracture was severe, the muscles surrounding it torn from the impact of her fall. Even with treatment, she would never be the warrior she once was. She hadn't spoken in hours. It was strange, he thought, to see her like this. Scara was a force of nature, a storm in human form. No, not human. She'd always been something more, something other, untouchable, unbreakable. Yet here she was, broken in a way that no blade had ever managed. He wasn't foolish enough to think she had accepted her fate. Scara was not one to surrender, not even to inevitability. But there was a quiet to her now, a stillness that had nothing to do with injury. Elian finished his work and sat back, his muscles sore from the effort. He hadn't stopped moving since he dragged her from the battlefield. His hands were stained with her blood, his clothes stiff with dried sweat and grime. Still, she hadn't thanked him. Not that he expected it. Her silver eyes flickered open, locking onto him. "You're still here," Elian exhaled. "I thought we covered this already." Her lips twitched. But it wasn't quite a smile, more an acknowledgement. Most men would have taken advantage of this moment. His brow furrowed. What moment? She shifted slightly, just enough to gesture at her weakened form. A fallen ruler, defenseless, at the mercy of someone she once commanded. He tilted his head. "And what do you think I should do?" Something dark passed through her gaze, but she only shook her head. "I don't know." And that, more than anything, unsettled her. Elian leaned forward, resting his forearms on his knees. "You think everyone's like you?" Her fingers curled slightly against the fabric of the cot. "I think everyone is capable of what I've done." There was no arrogance in her voice, no malice. Just truth. A truth she had lived by her entire life. Elian sighed, rubbing a hand over his face. "If I wanted revenge, Scara, I wouldn't have saved you." She looked at him for a long moment, as if searching for a lie. But she didn't find one. Instead, she let out a slow breath. "Then what do you want?" Elian hesitated. Because that was the question, wasn't it? The morning brought no comfort. The storm outside had passed, leaving behind a battlefield littered with remnants of war. Smoke still curled from the wreckage of downed ships, and the distant shimmer of scavengers picking through the dead cast an uneasy air over the landscape. They couldn't stay here forever. Elian knew that. And so did Scara. She sat upright now, propped against the bunker wall, her strength slowly returning. The bruises along her jaw had darkened, her once pristine warrior's skin now marred with the evidence of her fall. But her spirit remained unbroken. Elian passed her a small ration bar, which she took without argument. She hadn't refused food since the night before, a silent concession to the reality of her situation. "We need to leave soon," he said finally. She didn't respond immediately. Then, "And go where?" he shrugged. "Anywhere but here." A wry smirk touched her lips. "The mighty strategist." Elian rolled his eyes. "I'm keeping you alive. That's enough work as it is." Her smirk faded slightly. "Why are you keeping me alive?" He frowned. "I told you already." "No," she said, shaking her head. "You said you weren't like me, but that's not an answer." Elian exhaled. He had been avoiding this conversation, but she wasn't going to let him run from it any longer. "I've seen enough killing," he said quietly. "More than enough." Her gaze was unreadable. "And yet, you saved me." A lion met her eyes. "You were dying, Scara." She studied him, something unreadable in her expression. Then she said something that caught him completely off guard. "I was never afraid to die." A lion clenched his jaw. "Maybe not, but you didn't." Silence. Then she let out a slow breath. "And now I don't know what comes next." There was something raw in the admission, something she had likely never spoken aloud before. Elian leaned back, stretching out his sore muscles. "Welcome to the rest of us." She blinked. "What?" "The rest of us," he repeated. "People who don't wake up every day with a war to fight. People who don't measure their worth in victories." She scoffed. "You think that's what I am?" Elian tilted his head. "Isn't it?" For a moment, she didn't answer. Then softly, so softly he almost missed it, she said, "It's all I've ever known." Elian looked at her, really looked at her, and saw something beneath the iron shell. Not weakness, not fear, but uncertainty, and maybe, just maybe, the smallest flicker of something else. Scara had never felt the weight of uncertainty before. Her whole life had been built upon absolutes. Conquer or be conquered, kill or be killed. Strength was survival, and weakness was nothing more than an open grave waiting to be filled. Yet here she was, sitting in the cold wreckage of a war she had lost, speaking to a man she had once considered beneath her, and she did not know what came next. Elian sat across from her, rolling the stiffness from his shoulders. He had been quiet since their last conversation, letting the silence stretch between them like a chasm neither of them knew how to cross. She hated it. She hated not knowing. "What happens now?" she finally asked. Elian glanced at her, his expression unreadable. "We move?" Scara's lips twitched in something that wasn't quite amusement. "Move where?" "Somewhere that isn't here," he said simply. It was a non-answer, but she could hear the weight behind it. He wasn't thinking like a warrior, he was thinking like a survivor. The battlefield belonged to the victors now, and Scara was not one of them. Staying meant death. She exhaled slowly, shifting her injured leg. The pain was still there, a sharp reminder that she was no longer invincible. She had once led armies without fear. Now she could barely stand without help. Elian seemed to read her frustration because his voice softened, just slightly. "You're healing." She shot him a look. "I don't heal, I recover." He huffed a quiet laugh. "Same thing." "It isn't." Elian leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "You don't have to prove anything to me, you know." The words hit her harder than they should have. For as long as she could remember, her entire existence had been a battle to prove herself, to her father, to her empire, to the galaxy itself. Even when she had already won, she had never been allowed to stop fighting. And now she had nothing to prove to anyone, not even to a man who should have hated her. The realization left an unfamiliar hollowness in her chest, one she didn't have the words for. She looked away, focusing on the distant horizon. The sky above Draxos was a cold, endless void, stars stretching far beyond what she could see. The unknown had never scared her before, but now it did. "Elian," she said quietly. He tilted his head. "Yeah? If we leave this place," she murmured, "we leave my past behind." He studied her carefully. "And is that what you want?" For the first time in her life, she didn't have an immediate answer. The air was thin at the edge of the ruins, where the wreckage of a fallen warship loomed like a broken monument to everything Scara had lost. She stood there, leaning against the cold metal, her leg aching, her thoughts heavier than they had ever been. Elian was nearby, gathering supplies from whatever remained salvageable. He moved with practiced efficiency, always thinking ahead, always planning for survival. She envied that about him. Her whole life, survival had meant domination. It had meant taking before someone else could take from her. But Elian? He had survived by enduring, by knowing when to bend, when to wait, when to choose. She had never had that choice before, and now she did. "Elian," she called. He glanced up from where he was securing a pack. "Yeah?" She hesitated. The words felt foreign on her tongue, but she forced them out. "You could have left me." He straightened, studying her carefully. "I know," she exhaled, tilting her head slightly. "And yet you didn't." "No, I didn't." Silence stretched between them. She could hear the wind howling through the broken hull, the distant echoes of scavengers picking through the dead. This place was a graveyard, a monument to everything she had built and lost, and yet she was still alive. That had to mean something. "What happens if we leave?" she asked. Elian took a step closer, his gaze steady. "We figure it out," she scoffed. "You're a terrible strategist." He smirked. "Not planning to fight a war, Scara." She let out a quiet breath. "Then what are we doing?" Elian studied her for a long moment before answering. "Living." The simplicity of the word unsettled her more than anything else. Living. She had never lived before. She had ruled, she had conquered, she had survived. But now she had a choice. Slowly, she nodded. "All right." Elian raised an eyebrow. She exhaled. "Yeah." He gave her a small, knowing smile before turning back to his supplies. "Then let's get out of here." As Scara watched him work, something strange settled inside her, something she had never let herself feel before. For the first time in her life, she wasn't walking toward war. She was walking toward freedom. The wreckage of the battlefield stretched far beyond what the eye could see. The sky was cold, vast, indifferent to the blood that had soaked the ground beneath it. The war had moved on, leaving behind nothing but ghosts and the scavengers who picked through the remains. Scara should have been one of them. She should have died with her empire. That was the way of war, the way of warriors. Die in glory or live in chains. There had never been another path. And yet, here she was, standing at the edge of the ruins, breathing, alive. Because of him. Elian finished securing the last of the supplies onto his back. He moved with an ease she had come to recognize, not the practiced movements of a soldier, but the quiet patience of a survivor. He had always been waiting for a way out. She never had. "What are you thinking?" His voice cut through the silence, even though he didn't look up from his work. Scara exhaled. She had spent so long leading armies, making decisions without hesitation. And yet, the words forming on her tongue felt heavier than any war she had ever fought. "I don't know who I am," she admitted. Elian paused, then glanced at her. "You're Scara," she scoffed. That name belonged to someone else, someone who burned entire worlds without a second thought, someone who had power. His gaze didn't waver. "You still have power." She turned to him, frowning. "No, I don't. I have nothing." Elian took a slow step closer, his voice steady, certain. "You have a choice." She stiffened. It was such a simple statement, but it was the most dangerous thing she had ever been given. She had never been allowed to choose before. Not when she was born into an empire that demanded strength above all else. Not when her father forged her into a weapon. Not when she had to spill blood just to survive in a world where hesitation meant death. For the first time, she was free, and the weight of it terrified her. Elian sighed, adjusting the strap on his pack. "We should get moving. The longer we wait, the more likely someone finds us." She hesitated, looking back at the battlefield one last time. This place was all she had ever known. The war, the fighting, the constant battle for dominance. It had defined her, shaped her, but it didn't have to own her. With a final breath, she turned away from the ruins. "Let's go." Elian gave her a small nod, and together they stepped away from the wreckage of her past, towards something unknown, towards something new. The landscape shifted as they moved, the ruins giving way to open plains of ice and stone. Scara walked slower than she would have liked, her legs still weak from the injury, but she did not ask for help. Elian never offered, but she knew he would catch her if she fell. The thought unsettled her. She wasn't used to trusting anyone. She had spent her life surrounded by warriors who would gut her the moment she showed weakness. To lean on another was to invite betrayal. And yet, Elian had carried her from the battlefield. He had mended her wounds. He had stayed. "Where are we going?" she asked after a long while. Elian glanced at her, a smirk tugging at his lips. "I thought you didn't care." She rolled her eyes. "I need to know if I'm walking toward something or just running from something else." His expression sobered. A little of both. She hated how much sense that made. They walked in silence for a while longer, the wind howling around them. The horizon stretched endlessly ahead, a reminder of how vast the universe was beyond the walls of her former empire. Finally, she spoke again. "I don't want to live as a ghost." Elian slowed his steps, turning toward her fully. She held his gaze. "If I'm to live, I need purpose, not just survival." He studied her for a moment before nodding. "Then let's find one." She frowned. "That simple?" He grinned. You'd be surprised how much of life is just figuring it out as you go, she exhaled, shaking her head. That sounds terrifying. Ilian chuckled. Welcome to freedom. For the first time, she let the thought settle inside her. Freedom. Not a throne, not a war, not a title, just herself. And for the first time, the idea of the unknown didn't terrify her. It excited her. She glanced at Ilian, and for the first time since she had woken in that bunker, she smiled. A real, unguarded smile. All right, human, she said. Let's see what this freedom of yours is really worth. Ilian grinned, nodding ahead. Then let's get moving. We've got a future to find. And together they walked into the horizon, leaving the past behind.